In Seattle, Washington, a vial of insulin can cost $300. But in Vancouver, British Columbia, that same vial will cost $30. Same drug, same manufacturer, but 10 times the price on the US side of the border. And that's not a pricing error, it's how the US pharma system is designed. But this places a lot of pressure on the US consumer, especially since the pandemic. Housing, food, healthcare costs, these are all up across the board. And drug prices, they were never liked, but they were tolerated. Now they feel unbearable. Why should US consumers pay higher prices for drugs than consumers across the world? And in May 2025, something changed. The newly elected US president signed an executive order that aims to give US consumers the same drug prices as other consumers across the developed world. But this brings up a question. If Americans stop paying top dollar for pharmaceuticals, can America still lead the world in innovation? I'm Gary O'Keefe, and this is the Precision Medicine Pulse. Today we're digging into how the US model of drug development is shifting, what role AI and FDA reform will play, and how global forces from inflation to geopolitics are reshaping the future of medicine. Let's start with the economics driving this change. Now, this might be a little bit of an oversimplification, but in essence, the US pharmaceutical model works a little bit like this. Charge high prices at home and use the revenue from those prices to develop new and complex drugs, then sell these drugs globally and use these global sales to scale up manufacturing, which will reduce prices a little bit further. But the system is a little bit of a catch-22. Without the global demand, drugs would even be more expensive for US consumers. But without US consumers, these drugs would either not exist or they'd be way more expensive for consumers around the world. While this places a lot of pressure on US consumers, people in the US are on average a little bit wealthier than people around the world. And so this model has been working for decades. And it's ensured that America has been able to establish itself as the pharmacy of the world. But now, thanks to this shifting US policy, the rules are changing. When I talk about shifting policy, I'm talking about three major moves that this current administration is making. The first rule is what I just spoke about. It's a rule that ties US drug prices to the lowest prices in other rich countries. For example, if this rule were applied to Humira, which is a top-selling arthritis drug, and it costs around $6,000 per month in the US, its price could fall to under $1,000, matching what patients in Germany or the UK pay. If Germany pays less, well then so should Americans. That sounds fair, right? But it's directly cutting into a major revenue stream for US pharma companies. That puts pressure on them. The second move is a plan to support US-based drug manufacturing by, on the one hand, reducing red tape and making it easier to build and run domestic factories, and on the other hand, by introducing tariffs to make it less easy to import drugs from other countries into the US. But if you shift the manufacturing to the US, it's going to get more expensive. Labor, safety, and regulation are generally more expensive in America than they are overseas, at least right now. And also, it takes time to scale up manufacturing capacity, especially for complex biologics and advanced therapies that require specialized facilities. So with these first two policy moves, US pharma companies will now face a new set of pressures. First, they're going to have to reduce prices in the US, and this is going to reduce their revenue. Secondly, it's looking like they'll have higher manufacturing costs, and that will eat into their margins. With this margin being squeezed so much, it potentially breaks the current US pharmaceutical model. Companies that don't adapt will face serious consequences. They'll either innovate or die. So why would the US introduce policies that makes life more difficult to one of their key strategic industries? Well, those are not the only two policies that are being introduced. The US doesn't want to just make life more difficult for its industry. They also want their industry to be able to innovate more easily. And so they're introducing a major FDA reform package aimed at streamlining drug approvals, especially for AI-assisted and precision therapies. And these three policy proposals together are going to really change the way the model of American pharmaceutical industry works. And this isn't just happening in a global vacuum. While the US still leads in advanced medicine, the stakes are rising. Right now, China is gearing up to challenge the US and become the pharmacy of the world. China already leads in active pharmaceutical ingredient production, and it's now going after a bigger prize, next generation sequencing, or NGS. NGS is the backbone of modern precision medicine, guiding treatments for cancer, diseases, and more. Whoever controls next generation sequencing controls the entire architecture of future healthcare access, and the US and China are locked in a race to dominate this space. US-based Illumina is the current dominant global NGS hardware company, and firms like Thermo Fisher have accelerated development of their own sequencers, but China is also moving quickly. They have their own NGS sequencers, and they're actively sanctioning US companies like Illumina. So there's like a real battle going on for who controls the future state of the pharmaceutical industry in the world. And that makes you think, why would US want to potentially kneecap its own pharma industry at such a critical time? Well, if you look closer, it's really a combination of factors. First, China is catching up. It's gaining market share in the global pharmaceutical industry, and so internationally speaking, the current American model, the model that America has been using over the last few decades, it isn't working anymore. And secondly, if you focus domestically, US consumers are demanding change. So the model isn't really working domestically or internationally. So you might think, if America is throwing out their existing model, are they just admitting defeat to China? Well, that's not exactly what's happening either. You see, over the last half decade or so, an exciting trend has started to emerge in the pharmaceutical industry. AI is completely disrupting the financial and temporal costs associated with everything from disease diagnosis to bringing a new drug to market. Traditionally, bringing a new drug to market can take 10 years and billions of dollars, and most drugs actually fail along the way. But recently, companies have started cutting development time and costs dramatically, from 5 years, 10 years to just 18 months using AI. For instance, in silico medicine used AI to identify a promising fibrosis treatment candidate, and they brought it into human trials in just 30 months. That's way faster than traditional timelines. Another example is Exentia, which is AI designed drugs that are currently in clinical trials for cancer and inflammatory disease. If you can design a drug on a computer instead of in a lab, design cycles are just a lot faster, and that's the trend, and that's what's happening. Big firms and new startups alike are pouring money into this shift. Nvidia, for example, it's positioning itself as a center of AI in healthcare. They're partnering with drug makers and hospitals to deliver end-to-end platforms for drug discovery and diagnostics, all built on top of AI. Google and Stripe are also funding healthcare innovation labs. And with all that in mind, when we revisit the question, if Americans stop paying top dollar, can America still lead the world in medicine? The strategy behind their decision-making of the US administration starts to become a little bit clearer. The pharmaceutical paradigm is shifting. The US government isn't trying to shoot itself in the foot. America is betting that if they remove this domestic price premium that their pharmaceutical industry currently enjoys at the expense of the US consumer, well, then they'll force their industry to become leaner and more efficient in order to survive. And also they're betting that if they can make the FDA more efficient, they'll be able to allow their industry to speed up their innovation cycles. Because look, the current model of making Americans pay top dollar to fund global drug development, it's under stress. The pharmaceutical industry is bloated. It places an incentive for companies to fund salespeople instead of funding innovation, because innovation is so difficult and expensive. And so we're at a little bit of a turning point. For the US, the hope is that AI can make their healthcare system efficient enough to maintain and speed up these innovation cycles without relying on price inequality to subsidize the whole thing. If it works, we'll get great results. Faster treatments, fairer prices, and better access to precision medicine. So here's what to look out for. Will drug prices actually fall in the US, or is this just all political posturing? If drug prices do fall, how will companies react? Will they be able to get efficient enough to survive? The answers to these questions will shape medicine, not just in labs or in boardrooms, but in hospitals, homes, and lives around the world. Thank you for listening to the Precision Medicine Pulse. In this episode, I helped you see the bigger picture, so share it with someone else thinking about the future. Ciao, ciao!